Thank you for listening to the Chronicles of Christendom, a survey of medieval literature, by me, Mom Chilo. This podcast is dedicated to bringing light to medieval stories and viewing them from a traditional Christian perspective. I hope you enjoy this episode. So today we're going back into the world of King Arthur, specifically with the Middle High German poem called Lanzelet by Ulrich von Zatzikhoven. I'm probably saying that wrong, but yeah, that's it, Lanzelet. So it's the German version of Lancelot, and that's just the local German kind of translation, if you will. And then, so it's a Middle High German, so that means it's like from Southern Germany, High Germany, as in not like high as in north, but high as in like mountains. So it's from about 1200, give or take a couple years. Hard to say exactly, but very much in that range of very early 1200s or very late 1100s. So this is also a poem. So we'll be using the prose translation, but the poem, in case you want to know more about that, it's in rhyme tetrameter couplets. This is a little bit different than Chrétien, who does his writing in octosyllabic couplets. So in terms of our source, it's kind of hard to determine the source for this poem. There seems to be a lot of influence from Chrétien in terms of his Arthurian stories. However, Chrétien has his own Lancelot story. In fact, it's kind of the first Lancelot story we have in writing. But this poem, this Lanzelet poem, is weird because there's obviously a lot of influence from Chrétien and from some of his poems. However, it doesn't seem at all to be influenced by Chrétien's Lancelot. But there's going to be some other stuff we'll see, especially with like Eric and Enid, that I'll harken back to. Because if you remember, we did an episode a little while ago on Eric and Enid. So the general theory, which I think probably has a lot of truth to it, is that both Chrétien and Lanzelet are relying on some secondhand or some other common source. And that source might be written, however, there's also a good chance it was just a verbal thing. Because a lot of these stories were told, in the verbal form. They were told by, these bards and these troubadours. They would tell these stories, and then people would later write some of them down. And reading Lanzelet, it's kind of clear as well that this story is meant to be read out loud. Like there's several times where he says, now quiet and listen to this part. And there's other sort of like verbal things that are added in that suggest that it was intended to be read out loud, or perhaps it was written down from somebody who was speaking it out loud, or some combination thereof. So this isn't the first Arthurian German romance that we have. There's some other German stories as well, specifically from Hartmann von Au, as well as von Eschenbach. And so von Eschenbach is famous for his Parsifal story, which is kind of the German Percival, if you will. And famously, Wagner, like Richard Wagner in the 19th century, made an opera based off of Parsifal. And as a little side note, that opera that he made was the reason why Nietzsche broke away from Wagner, because he thought it was too Christian and too moralistic, and that it was below Wagner to write such an opera. And so go back to Lanzelet, and the Chrétien connection, though. The reason why I said earlier that he doesn't seem to be influenced at all by Chrétien's Lancelot is because the main thing that Chrétien does with Lancelot is he begins the notion of Lancelot having an affair with the queen. However, that's no way suggested in Ulrich's story. So if we're relying on what Ulrich tells us in this story, he says this towards the end of the poem. He says that he got this source from an English hostage in Germany. So at that time, or in the medieval ages, it was common for people to have hostages from another kingdom as a sort of like surety for various things, like maybe you get captured and then you're released, and you're released upon, a promise of payment. The idea that once you're released, you're going to go and, give the payment that's due. However, oftentimes as surety, certain people from the king's court, or even his only family members sometimes, are kept as hostages until payment is made. So Ulrich here says that he gets the source from a certain English hostage who was sort of like a hostage on behalf of Richard the Lionheart when he was coming back from a crusade. And there is some reason to suspect that this is true. The main thing is that it's kind of like a random, like minor noble family. However, when we go to that noble family's, tree, their family tree, we find a certain name, like a female name, Ada, that appears twice in their family tree, and that name also appears as a character in Lanzelet. However, nowhere else in the Arthurian literature do we really see that name. So there is some credence there. However, it also just kind of was a somewhat popular name, so it could be coincidence. But that's enough of that. Let's get into this story. So we're first introduced to King Pont, and Ulrich tells us that his other name, he's also known as Bon in like other languages. And this king is probably related, like in terms of like as a character, he's probably related to King Bran, who we learned about in the Four Branches of the Mabinogion. Because remember, a lot of this Arthurian stuff is very Celtic. Some people like Richard Sherman Loomis, who was this early or mid 20th century Celticist, he was very keen on this idea that almost all this Arthurian stuff all originates back from, Celtic stories and myth. However, he often, how should I say this? He was oftentimes creative with the facts and trying to prove it. So obviously there is a lot of like Celtic influence, but there's also other influences as well. But I think here that the fact that this king is called Pont or Bon, it's very clearly related to the figure of Bran. But anyway, so we have this King Pont, and King Pont is the king of Genoese. And we're told that this king, he's very unvirtuous, and he has made many enemies through his excessive wars and his injustice. However, the only thing that's keeping him alive and that's keeping him from not being totally, betrayed and hated is that he has a very beautiful and virtuous wife named Clarine. And this is the reason why the king is still able to maintain power, because she is very noble and virtuous. So after some time, they give birth to a son, and this son is foretold to be a great warrior. And there's a little bit of a weird detail that's added. So we're told that Clarine nurses the child herself. And you might be thinking, okay, how is that weird? Well, it's weird because we're often told, well, first off, it's weird that it's included. But the reason why we're told this is because a lot of times in these stories, in this sort of like genre of like romance or, with nobility involved, is that the nobility do not typically nurse the children themselves. They have wet nurses and maids who do it for them. So the fact that she does it herself is quite significant. And it's also was probably a practice that the nobility, like the actual nobility, like the historical nobility at the time, did as well, like employing these wet nurses and maids to care for their young children. So when the child is about 1 year old, many of the nobles conspire against Pont. They've had enough of him. And we're even told that the people who conspired against him were mostly those who would get nothing out of it. And they lay siege to him, and most of Pont's knights just abandon him. And he only has like his royal guard who stick with him. And then he gets injured in the fighting, and then him and his wife and the child as well, they run off to a spring near the castle. And then we're told that Pont dies after he takes a sip. But then we're told that a water fairy appears and takes the child into her land. So I'm going to read from the story. A lady took him, a wise mermaid who was queen, better than any who now live. She had 10,000 ladies in her land, not one of whom had ever seen a man, nor even man's apparel. They had shifts and gowns of brocade and of silk. I shall not fail to tell you the truth, that all the year round her land was abloom in the middle of May. Moreover, the residence of these ladies was splendidly wide and long, and the enclosure magnificent. The mountain was a crystal, round as a ball, on which the mighty castle stood. They feared no foreign foe, nor any king's army. All around the land lay the sea and a wall so strong that no one could be cunning enough, even if he might entertain the thought, to get over it, except where the gate stood, and that was a hard diamond. And then skipping a few lines, it says, "The ladies who dwell there were blissfully happy. The precious stones that had been worked into the building possess such virtue, so we are told, that whoever dwelled there for even a day would never feel sorrow, but would live always in joy till the hour of his death." So this is very obviously a otherworldly figure, right? So we have like, a water fairy or like a mermaid. So don't think like mermaid as in like a Ariel from like Disney, right? Where it's like the top is human, the bottom is like a fish or something. They didn't really have that connotation. That's like a much later sort of image of mermaid. Rather just means like a water lady or like a water fairy. And so they're in this magical castle that's surrounded by this huge lake that's it's guarded by this diamond wall, as well as the other obvious telltale sign that this is the other world is that the ladies have gowns of brocade. So as I've said several times in some of these episodes, whenever you hear brocade and you see like these magical women, that it's a very obvious sign of the other world. Brocade, like or brocaded silk, is a telltale sign. It's the classic sign that we're dealing with the other world. So these women, they raise the child and they raise him well. And then when he gets old enough, the mermen, so like the men, they teach him how to fight. But they don't teach him chivalry. So what that means is that they don't teach him how to fight on horse or how to handle a horse. And they also don't teach him how to use armor. And the main thing about being a knight, what distinguished a knight from other types of soldiers, besides like the nobility or the the ranks and all that, is the armor. The armor was the most expensive thing, but it also made it so that you were really hard to kill, and that's the most important thing. So like when we're told a knight is armed in the medieval literature, it doesn't mean that he has a weapon. It means that he has all of his armor on. So when the child turns 15, he asked to leave. So when the time came to ask to take his leave, he went to a suitable place where he might have a good opportunity of speaking to his liege lady, the queen. "Look now with favor," he said, "on my request, and reveal to me my kinsman, for I do not know who I am. I have idled away all this time, so that I am heartily ashamed that I am ignorant of my name. Be assured that it grieves me." She replied, "It will never be told you." "Why? Who has forbidden you to tell it?" "My shame and my great distress." "Explain them to me, no matter how great they are." "You are too young for that. You do not know how to protect yourself from harm." "Then let me go forth nameless. Surely my name will be known to me." "You must first get the upper hand of the best knight who has ever lived." "Tell me his name. Why hesitate?" "He is called Yveret, of the beautiful wood Beferet. His castle is called Dodun. Avenge what he has done to me, and I shall ever be grateful, and be certain, beyond any doubt, that your name shall be kept from you till you have first vanquished him. If you are valiant, you will find him. God grant that things go well for you, for his manly prowess is so great that I know no one who is his equal. In my opinion, he surpasses all the best." So the lady allows him to leave, but he's not allowed to know his name. And he's only going to learn his name once he defeats Yveret, and we'll see how this plays out later. So he leaves, he's given a set of armor, and he's given a horse, but once he leaves, he has no idea how to ride the horse. We're told that he's on the horse, but his horse leads him, and he's only guided by good fortune. And this is a constant motif we're going to see throughout the story, is that Lanzelet is guided by this good fortune that protects him, and also protects him not only physically, but also protects him from envy as well. And we'll see how that plays out later in the story. But anyway, so we're told that early the next morning, he saw not far from his road a castle. So remember, he's just kind of wandering about on his horse, or letting his horse guide him. So the castle is lofty and fair. Moderating its pace, his charger, so his horse, turned towards the castle gate. In front of it was a dwarf, sitting on a white palfrey and carrying a long whip. He was a creature devoid of all honor. He struck a blow below the eyes of the famed hero's horse. The hero, and this is no falsehood, thought that this must be the proper thing to do, and the stalwart warrior took the affront very lightly until he himself got a whip cut from the little troll. Even then he took no vengeance on the miserable wretch, for he deemed him too unworthy, but he conceived a great anger towards the castle where this had taken place. So there's a similar story in Eric and Enid that we covered where there's like this dwarf that acts very dishonorably, and we're going to see this dwarf come back later in the story. So his horse carries him along still, and then eventually he runs into a knight near the castle. So the castle is called Plurus. And the knight who's there, he's kind of aghast that such a well-adorned knight, because we're told he has this beautiful white shining armor, that such a beautifully adorned knight has no idea how to ride or even carry his weapons. And he actually thinks that it's some form of penitence that's been assigned to him. So the knight who's there calls out to him. He says, "Grant me what I ask of you," said he to the warrior from the lake, "for you are doing a great disservice to yourself and to your fine steed. Follow my instructions. You should always keep hold of the reins, stop bobbing about in the saddle, pay more attention to what you are doing, and ride as I do for the rest of the day. I shall be forever grateful if you will. I can offer you friendship and honor if I find my horse as I left it. My castle is not far from here. Consent to stay here and pay court to the ladies. They will help you pass the time pleasantly. It is not a half-mile distant." So he ends up staying at the castle for 3 days, and there at the castle of Plurus, he learns how to be a proper knight. So he learns how to ride, he learns how to carry himself, and all those things that a knight is supposed to do. At least the material minimum that you need, like the sort of technique that you need to carry your weapons and your armor. So then he goes on riding again, and this time he's riding much better. We're told that he rides very well actually. So while he's riding about, he encounters 2 knights who are fighting, and he has them stop, and they head to a nearby castle for lodging. But the lord of this castle is quite a harsh man. Part of the reason, we're told, is that his wife has passed away, and because of that, he's become quick to anger. And we're also told that he has a beautiful daughter. So even though we're told that the man of the castle is a very harsh lord, nonetheless, these 3 knights still end up, they kind of take the risk of lodging with the lord because night is coming and they don't want to be found outside at night. And because of Lanzelet's good fortune, they are welcomed without any issue. And then after some time, they are sent to bed. Their host escorted them himself and had excellent wine poured for them. He arranged the pillows for each with his own hand. Then he said, "Heroes, as you lie here, do not violate the rules of proper conduct. May God, who reigns supreme over all the world, keep you in his power and grant you have now a good night." And then as they're lying down and going to bed, we're told that the beautiful daughter walks into their room where all the knights are in bed. And we're told that it was her wish that bright candles now be lighted there. She wanted to find out just what the customary behavior of the heroes was and how they, under these circumstances, had arranged their beds, for she was burning with the powerful desire for love. She was dressed beautifully and very elegantly. Her mind was bent upon nothing but that which occupies the thoughts of one longing for passion. She had eluded the chaperonage that all women detest. Love so tormented her and compelled her thus so powerfully that she was driven to boldness. She then tries to seduce the knights laying in the beds. And the first 2, so not Lancelot, so the other 2 knights, the first 2, reject her and deny her. Basically saying that her father they know is a harsh lord, and it would be wrong for them to do it because they'll get in a lot of trouble. However, Lanzelet takes her up on her offer, and we're actually told that it's said to cause a lot of discomfort to the others because while they're doing the act, all the others are they're all still in the same room, right? So you can imagine how that might be a little bit awkward. But then her father rushes in the room and sees them and then challenges Lanzelet to a knife-throwing duel. And now, knife-throwing duels probably weren't like an actual thing, or maybe they were, but they weren't that common. It's more so like a literary trope. But anyways, they undertake this duel, and the lord of the castle, he throws the first knife at Lanzelet, and then he hits him, but he hits him non-fatally. He's kind of, he's able to survive his wound. But then Lanzelet, instead of throwing a knife back at the lord, instead he rushes at him with the knife and then kills the lord. So we see here from the start that Lanzelet, he's not very, although he knows how to physically carry himself as a knight, which he learned in Plurus. He hasn't yet learned the more finer aspects of being a knight, and he violates this sort of code of chivalry by breaking the duel or breaking the rules of the duel and just killing the lord. And then because the lady is his only daughter, his only child, she is next in line. And so Lanzelet kind of inherits all the land because they essentially are like kind of married, I guess you could say. It's kind of weird how marriage is defined here or how marriage works here. So like for instance, earlier when the poem is describing the duel, it talks about the lord of the castle as Lanzelet's father-in-law, right? So even though they weren't like officially married through like the church, they were kind of, because of their act that they did, they became like informally married, or like kind of like a lay marriage, I guess you could say, which actually was a thing that did happen. The in the West, at least, the church didn't require marriages to be taken or undertaken by like a priest or in some sort of church setting up until like the 1200s, 1300s. It started being more and more enforced. But before then, you very well could have like just like lay marriages. So we're told that the lady took the young knight and placed both land and people wholly in his hands. And so, as soon as he recovered from his wound, he inherited that which had been lately been the forester. So the forester refers to the lord of the castle. The new lord of the castle was most generous, like one to whom possessions are meaningless. What his father-in-law had hoarded, he now dispensed bounteously, for he had won it with his prowess. Then he appointed a steward in accordance with the advice of wise counselors. And so then we learn that the two knights who are with him, when they see this, when they see that he's ruling well, he's giving gifts, which a good lord is supposed to do. He's doing all these things right. They, as knights of Arthur's court, they go back to Arthur and tell him about this wondrous knight that they've seen and how generous and how well he's ruling this new land. And they also try to tell him that he needs to go and meet King Arthur, but then he replies saying that it would be a great shame if I should try to fly before I have my feathers. So because he still doesn't know his name, it's still this source of like shame for him, or it's a sort of like incomplete journey that he needs to complete before he can go on to like other adventures. And we'll see this happen a few other times. And a detail I want to point out here is that we're never told the name of the lady who he's with. And this is probably related to the fact that Lanzelet at this time also doesn't even know his own name. So in the same way that he doesn't know his own name and is still in some sense a bit like immature, this lady, who is obviously very kind of immature, very much guided by the passions, we also don't know her name, and we're never told her name either. So in this sense, they're both kind of on an equal level here. After ruling for some time, Lanzelet goes out riding again, and he leaves that castle. He kind of leaves it behind, kind of forgetting about it almost. And he encounters another castle. And this castle has a strange custom. And again, it is also ruled by another unjust lord. So I'll read here. The strange custom of the castle is this: no traveler, whether foolish or wise, arrived there without carrying an olive branch, which was a sign that he came in peace. And whoever came there bearing arms carried his helmet in his hand and turned down his ventail. Otherwise, he rued it later, when he got within sight of the castle. For whoever happened to disregard the custom of the land was dealt with so harshly that he did not survive, no matter how valiant or noble he was. This custom was unknown, hence the subsequent difficulties to the proud warrior who did not know who he was. Lancelot approaches this castle, and he doesn't abide by the custom because he just doesn't know it. And then as he approaches, though, he's attacked by several knights. We're told that they fight him as if he had killed their father. So as he's fighting, the Lord's niece, which is his heir, Ade, sees this, or sees his prowess and falls in love with him. And she is able to have him surrender to her and lodges him. And he's very lucky at this time, we're told, because her uncle was out of town, or kind of like, he was out, he was not in the castle at this time. But when he returns, he asks Lancelot for his name, and since he doesn't know his name yet, he's not able to give him an answer. And so because of this, in his anger, he throws him into his tower as a prisoner. So this prison, it's not fun. Of course, we're told that there's filth everywhere. That's very dreadful, and he's only given bread and water. However, he is given a little bit of comfort in the sense that the lady Ade, she administers to him in prison and kind of gives him a little bit of extra food and wine. And then she also tells him of a challenge that his uncle has set in which he can be freed. For the sake of his chivalry and driven by overweening pride, my uncle has ridden out and proclaimed through many messengers in every land that any knight whatsoever who wishes to win fame through his strength and his prowess, or through any sort of reckless daring, should come here and essay his adventure. I will tell you the nature of it. One must first of all confront a giant, whose strength I can estimate somewhat by means of his club. Even with great effort, 2 men can hardly lift it. Whoever defeats this giant, something that can scarcely happen, must then immediately fight 2 wild lions, savage and fierce. These are kept in a pit enclosed by a wall. Whoever fights them can bear no other weapon other than his sword, and if it is granted to him that his good luck protects him and he overcomes the lions, and that is a perilous undertaking, he must immediately repair to the arena and joust with my uncle, as is the custom of worthy knights on horseback and in full panoply. And so he tells the lady that, he does want to take on the adventure, and then the lady pleads with her uncle to allow him to undertake the adventure. So he agrees, and then Lancelot goes to the arena, and with fortune on his side, he defeats the giant. And then he defeats the starved lions, and then he has to fight Lanier, that's the name of the Lord. And after a long fight, Lancelot finally kills him, but he is also severely injured in the process. So once he, completes all the challenge, all the people declare, "Our Lord has a good replacement. Let us give land and lady to the man who has slain him, if God should spare his life." So as I said, Lancelot is very injured, and it's not clear whether or not he is going to survive. But we're told that the virtuous damsel began with masterful skill to rub him everywhere with an ointment so potent that his flesh and his blood grew hot enough that the desire for life returned to the battle-weary man. And he ends up making a full recovery, and he ends up inheriting all of the land of Lanier. And his prowess again reaches the court of King Arthur, and all the knights and the king want to see him. Even the queen expresses her desire to see him as well. And so Arthur sends Gawain, or in this story his name is Valvain, but in parentheses we're all told Gawain. So it's clear that Ulrich understands that Gawain is kind of the original figure, but in the German tradition, I guess he's called Valvain, so that's what we'll call him here, Valvain. So he sends Valvain out to go and meet Lanzelet. So now Ulrich, as like the narrator, he asks whether or not Lanzelet and Ade ever slept with each other. So he asks, "Did he ever lie with her? I do not know, for I did not see it. If any such thing ever took place, it remained a secret. It would be an evil state of affairs if everything that happens became common knowledge. So, though I have heard this very thing, I attribute it to the wishful thinking of the ladies. Now be silent and let me continue." So we see how Lancelot has this a new approach in dealing with the ladies, if you will, right? So the first lady that he meets, he kind of sleeps with her on first sight. He doesn't even know her name, or at least we're not told her name. But this time, when he has a very similar situation in which he challenges the lord of the castle to fight, or he's challenged by the fight, he undertakes the adventure, he plays by the rules, and this time it's not so clear that he takes the female heir, for any sort of like sexual pleasure or for any sort of thing of that nature. And again, it's also relevant that we actually know her name this time. So we see Lancelot moving up the hierarchy and being much more like conscientious when it comes to dealing with the ladies. So since Arthur had sent Valvain out to meet Lancelot, they eventually do meet, and we're told that he runs into him at a certain crossroads. And Valvain recognizes him by his armor. And then Valvain takes off his helmet and tries to introduce himself to Lancelot, but Lancelot takes this the wrong way, and instead he says that Valvain must fight him. So they begin to fight, but then as they're fighting, they're interrupted by a herald. And the herald tells them that there's a huge tournament that is going on, and that they are all invited, and that all these knights from all across the land are invited. And don't think of a tournament here as the sort of a kind of almost stereotypical image that we have of a joust, where it's like, these 2 knights who are just running along down a row, who are trying to hit each other, and then whoever unhorses the other wins. or something like that. That's a much more later development and a much more later image that develops. Rather, what a tournament was in this context, and it plays out in the story as well, is it was much more of just a general fight, I guess you could say. That it wasn't so formalized. There was formality to it, of course, like you weren't supposed to kill the other, but it was a lot more about, trying to take ransom, take hostages, and then also trying to take the other knight's armor and horse for your own wealth. So they wouldn't have met on this like formal field where there's a row where you can, ride your horses down. Rather, it was kind of just like an open field. So they agree to go, and Volvain immediately goes off. However, Lancelot, he takes a couple days, and then he goes off to the tournament. So when he arrives at the tournament, he puts on green armor so that no one will be able to recognize him. So this doesn't mean that like the metal itself was green, but rather that the clothes that he has over his armor are green. He has as his squire Tybalt, who is his Ade's brother, and then Tybalt tells him kind of about what's going on. And so he says, "You should not commit yourself to anything until you have looked into it carefully. King Arthur is camped there with all his knights. Avoid them, that is my advice, for strength and prowess lie there." But then the next line says, "The unknown hero rode straight for where he had been advised not to go." And then the first person to challenge him is going to be Kay. So Kay, as in Chrétien stories, he's a very vainglorious. He's very prideful, very boastful as well. He's called a braggart here, very rash. However, one thing that he has going for him is that he's very loyal. But anyway, so Kay is the first one to go. He sees him riding towards them. He says, "I want to take him on." So Kay tries to fight against him, but then he's immediately knocked off his horse by Lanzelet. Tybalt then goes to take Kay's horse. And again, as I said, the point of these sort of jousts or these sort of competitions or battles is to get loot and also get ransoms and then, get some money from the ransoms. So after Kay is unhorsed, Arthur then sends more knights against him, but Lancelot defeats them all, and Tybalt takes all the loot and all the horses. And he even sends Eric. So this is the same Eric from Eric and Enid. We're told that he's the son of the King of Loch, which is the same title that he has in Eric and Enid in Chrétien's story. So seeing how this knight, this unknown green knight, is able to unhorse all these opponents, all these very worthy knights, including Eric, who's supposed to be one of the best knights, Gawain realizes that the Green Knight is Lanzelet. So the next day, Lanzelet, he takes off his green armor and he puts on his white armor. And then he continues to beat everyone, not just the Arthurian knights. In fact, he's so successful that the tournament is called off 7 days early because of Lanzelet's clear success that he's having. So Gawain realizes who this white knight is. He's the same as the green knight. And as the tournament is over, he talks to him, and then they kind of realize, who each other are. They kind of, I guess, confirm who this unknown knight is, even though he still doesn't know his name. And then Volvain has to go and get his father from Lanzelet because, his father was captured by Lanzelet and made prisoner. But he's not mad. He pays the ransom and does everything, he's supposed to do. And then Volvain says to Lanzelet, he says, "If God preserves me so that I may act as I desire, be assured that I will come and seek you out wherever you are, for I am quite determined to deny you nothing. You will never hear of such loyal parting as that between these two. Each spoke well of the other as a stalwart friend should, for showing friendship to a man's face and then forgetting it when that man is out of sight is a despicable act. They certainly did not behave like that. Whether the other's road is too long to tell, but our victorious hero sent his followers home. He himself took the road that was supposed to lead to Pleuris." So as you can see, Volvain and Lancelot are now really good friends, and Lancelot has to ride off though. So he rides off back to Pleuris. So Pleuris, if you remember, is the place where he was dishonored by the dwarf who whipped him and his horse. But at the time, if you remember, he was still, fresh from the fairyland. He still didn't know that it was a slight against his honor of what had happened. But now he's kind of determined to right the wrong that happened there. So he goes out trying to go back to Pleuris. And I also need to mention that he has alongside with him Tybalt and his sister, who is Ade, right? Lady Ade, who he kind of marries. And as they're riding, the story says they espied a castle standing on the level plain with the river flowing around it, which was called Der Kall, so not plurus. The castle was painted on the outside and topped by a strange roof. It lay under a magic spell, such that anyone who entered it uninvited by its lord was turned into a coward, and though he were as fierce as a wild boar, there he lost his courage and strength. So as they are riding up towards the castle, they're totally unaware of this spell that it makes you a coward if you go to the castle uninvited. So they're under the spell, they're going up to the castle, and then they're attacked. But Lancelot doesn't defend himself. He just kind of takes it, and he's eventually captured. And then Tybalt says to Ade, his sister, he says, "Let us depart, for you have seen for yourself what has happened to this coward." And now these two characters exit the story, and we don't see anything of them or hear anything of them again. But there's a couple other details about this castle that I need to mention. So the lord of the castle is named Mabuse, and he is the son of the water fairy who took Lancelot when he was a baby and then raised him on their island. And we're told that this Mabuse is very cowardly. He's very subject to anger and wrath. He often orders people killed just to satiate his anger. And we're told by the story that it had been prophesied to this queen before she bore her son, to the Mabuse, that he would always be a coward. For this reason, she spared no effort over this marvelous castle so that it could protect him. So the protection being that whoever comes to the castle also becomes a coward. He has another dwelling as well, which is called the Beautiful Wood. However, this castle is under the authority of Yveret. And if you remember from the beginning of the story, Yveret is the person that the water fairy tells Lancelot that he must kill him before he's able to learn his name in order to avenge her for the shame that he brought onto her. And we originally weren't told what the shame was. She says, I'm not going to say it. However, now we learn what the shame was, namely that Yveret took her son's castle. So going back to the plot, we find again that Lancelot is imprisoned in a castle. And while he's prisoner in this castle, Yveret again starts to attack Mabuse. So he has like this raiding party that goes around some of the lands around his castle, and they're setting fires to some of the lands. And in Mabuse's desperation to kind of fight back these raiders and these arsonists, he goes to his prison and he tries to find the most vile person in the prison. And the implication seems to be that the curse that's put upon the castle kind of has like an inverse effect, as in whoever is the most bold, the most brave, the most honorable becomes the most depraved and the most cowardly while they're underneath the spell. So he's looking for the person who's the most depraved, and he sees that Lanzelet is the most depraved person in the prison. So he grabs him and then he puts him on armor and on a horse, and then he has him go out and fight the raiders. And as soon as he kind of leaves the vicinity or the proximity of the spell, he again regains all of his courage and all of his strength, and then he goes and he beats back the raiders. But then after that, of course he's not going to go back, but instead he finds this monastery. And this monastery, we learn, is under Yveret's jurisdiction, and it's called the Sorrowful Fief. And it's here that Lancelot learns from the abbot, who we're told is very wise. He learns all about Yveret and the beautiful forest and kind of all the lore that I just told you guys just a few minutes ago. And then he also tells him a little bit more. So the abbot says, "I will tell you in all brevity, my lord Yveret is a mighty prince and valiant. He rules 3 fine kingdoms that he inherited, besides others that he has taken from those who opposed him. He has but one child, a noble daughter, and I will tell you that I have never heard anyone claim he had ever before beheld a maiden so lovely. My lord has declared that if any knight covets his daughter, he must meet him in fierce combat in the beautiful wood." And then he goes on to tell him some more details about this challenge, like how to start it. Basically, he says you have to go to the beautiful wood, and there is this bronze symbol, and when you bang the symbol, then the battle will start. And if you beat Yveret, then you can gain his daughter. And this beautiful forest is quite a magical or like enchanted forest as well. So we're told it was green as grass both winter and summer. Many fine trees grew there that bore fruit all year round on one side, ripe and very good, and yet were also in blossom on the other side at the same time. Whatever a person desired to eat, I do not want to forget this, that is just what the fruit tasted like. Whoever hears this, let him marvel, for it was indeed an amazing thing. The fruit also cured people of all diseases if they were still able to move enough to eat it. There was no wound so great, but that if the fruit were bound over it, it healed at once, so long as the body still contained the soul. And then we're told that the reason why Everett was able to slay so many people who have earlier attempted the challenge is because he eats these herbs that grow in the forest that give him strength and make him very bold beyond measure. And we're also told that just because of all the healing properties of the garden or of this kind of valley, this where the castle's at, this forest valley, because of the healing properties, he's able to maintain his health and always be healthy. And the name of his daughter, his beautiful daughter, who's the prize for the challenge, her name is Iblis. And Iblis, we're told, has every virtue that adorns the name of a woman. And that she's just in general, she's very virtuous, she's very beautiful, she has all these good qualities about her. We're even told that she is the very ideal of perfection. God exerted the utmost effort over her every virtue. And this Iblis lady, she has a dream. And her dream, which happens, very quickly before Lancelot enters the forest, or maybe while he's in the forest, it's not exactly clear, but, shortly thereafter, Iblis has this dream of a knight whom she falls in love with. And then as she's walking about in the forest and she sees Lancelot about to strike the symbol to initiate the challenge, she realizes that is the man from her dreams, and she falls in love with him and she vows to marry him. And then she says that they should just run away. So she's talking to them and she says, hey, look, don't do the challenge. Let's just run away. But Lancelot says that he will win her according to the challenge. So again, we see how Lancelot has kind of matured as a knight in the sense that, when it first came to the very first woman from the first castle, he kind of cheated the challenge, I guess you could say, when he was challenged to the knife throwing duel. But now he is going to go about the challenge according to the rules of it. So since he banged the cymbal, Everett comes out riding on his horse and he says, who is it that has struck the cymbal? The stranger said, I have done it. For what reason? I could not forego it. Will you undertake my adventure? Yes, I will. You are not equal to it. I cannot with honor refuse it. Now what do you wish to gain here? A beautiful woman in your land. At this, Everett's anger flared. And then after some fighting, Lancelot eventually gets the upper hand and he cuts off Everett's head. So he won the first lady by killing her father outside the norms of the duel. The second lady, it's implied that they just didn't have any sort of sexual relations. But this time, he undertakes the challenge according to the rules. And then we're told that he actually does lie with this woman, and that kind of consummates the marriage. And as I said, lay marriage was a thing that could happen and did happen. And especially in these stories where it's kind of set in a different world almost, or kind of like in a parallel world, sort of, the norms are a bit different. And one of the norms that's often different is that marriage doesn't necessarily have to be done through like the church authorities. So after they've been hanging out for a while, shall we say, he then runs into one of the water fairies from the land where he was raised, and then he learns his name. So she tells him, because you have accomplished that which my lady desired of you, said the messenger, so thank her and God that you have now succeeded so well. Hitherto your name has been concealed from you. I bid you learn it now. You are called Lanzelet, favored by fortune and lofty birth. I know no one your equal. Your father's name was Pont. Genoese was his land. It is your rightful legacy of no benefit to those who have taken possession of it. The man will never be found who shall ever defeat you. That is true, for I promise you this in the name of my lady, who is ever truthful. It has been foretold to her what wonderful things shall befall you. It is through your mother, through her virtuous conduct in all things, that you rightly deserve to be blessed by fortune in old age and in youth, Clarine the queen. There never lived a better lady. The world was rather hostile towards your father, for he was quick to anger. He was, as I can inform you, slain by his own vassals. My lady carried you away from there and brought you up with tender care. As a token that I have not lied to you, I bring you this box. It contains a precious pavilion that you rightly deserve to be fortune's favorite is proved by this gift. So we'll learn more about this pavilion in the beginning of part 2 of this series. We should finish the story up by the next episode. So I just kind of want to end it right where he learns his name, and then we'll learn more about the pavilion and the rest of the adventures in the next episode. So I hope to see you all there. Thank you so much.